We are here to frighten and disturb. Listen at your own discretion.
You must be either mad or insane to seek out this godforsaken place. But since you're here, I guess I can show you the nest of horrors. Don't fall in.
Today's story has been pulled out of the nest by Reddit user mandahrk, entitled The Wandering Wraith of Wadgoan. Narrated by Finja Kiehn, Eduardo Riedel, and Regalado.
I was but a child when she appeared in my room, dressed in white clothes that became moonlight itself. She stood still at the foot of my bed, like she had always been there. I knew who she was, through frightful whispers drifting down the corridors and stern warnings issued to errant children. I had learned enough about the Wraith to know that I should be terrified of her, just like everyone else in the village. She hadn't been here for long, but the people in the village had quickly figured out how to deal with her. Don't talk to the Wraith, they'd say. Don't look at her. Don't acknowledge her. Just leave her be, and she'll let you live. Shivering under my blanket with my toes curled painfully tight, I recited those instructions like they were a life-saving mantra, and gradually the lump in my throat began to deflate. But then a lightning flash lit up the room, and I couldn't help but let out a scream so piercing it reverberated down the numerous maze-like hallways of our house. She was like death incarnate. Charred skin stretched over a brittle skeletal frame, a gaunt face with broken nose and eyes that had been gouged out years ago. The haunting image seared itself onto my eyelids, such that I could see her even with my eyes shut. I expected, no, desperately wanted my father to come running into my room to chase her away. But he never came. Maybe our house was too big. Maybe the hallways were too long, and maybe he was in too deep in the bottle. But my voice never reached him that night. For hours I stayed there, soaking the sheets with my sweat and intermittently peeking at the Wraith as she loomed over me like a lightning-struck tree. Only when the darkness began to dissipate did she leave the room, the receding jingle-jangle of her bangles announcing her departure. In the morning I found my father hunched over the dining table, staring at the cereal which congealed in front of him. After hesitating for about half a minute, I cleared my throat and told him about the visitor that had come the previous night. He grunted in a disinterested fashion and told me to ignore her before getting up and retrieving another bottle of that loathsome amber-colored liquid. His reaction didn't surprise me. He'd been this way all my life. Our maid once told me he used to be different. Happy, when Mother was still alive, but she died giving birth to me. I was their 7th child, she said. All my siblings had passed away soon after being born. I was the only one who survived.
He might be cold, but he still loves you,
the maid said, while squeezing my cheeks.
You're his little girl.
I pursed my lips, not believing her. For the longest time I thought that he hated me for killing his wife. And so it was that I was forced to learn to deal with the Wraith all on my own. I gleaned from others in the village that she would come and go at random, appearing in people's homes when they would least expect it, murdering them in a horrific manner if they end up accidentally disturbing her, almost as if she was baiting them. The mere sight of the black figure in a white sari was enough to inspire bone-chilling fear in the villagers. For her victims died a most gruesome death, tales of skulls crushed to a pulp, and bodies contorted at impossible angles became commonplace the older her legend got. The more I learned, the more it scared me. I began peeking around corners, getting up on my toes to switch on all the lights, shying away from mirrors, all so that I could avoid the Wraith. For the longest time, my biggest fear was accidentally running into her. I would imagine myself crashing into her body, thin yet with a hidden iron-like strength. I would see myself get trapped in the various folds of her sari, the fabric wrapping around my throat and slowly choking the life out of me. I would scream myself hoarse, but no help would ever come. It would have been easier to move past this had she not been such a persistent presence in my life. She was there, everywhere in the house. On top of the staircase, in the corner of the bedroom, in the tub in the bathroom, next to the window in the study. She would materialize out of thin air and set my heart aflame every time. I began dreading the sound of her bangles. Just a soft jingle was enough to make my heartbeat hammer in my temple. It amazes me that, being as afraid as I was of the Wraith, I still did what I did. Maybe it was the loneliness that got to me. Father was never interested in spending time with me, and I didn't have a lot of friends either. Being the only daughter of the richest and most powerful man in the village made the other kids at school deeply afraid of me. I guess somewhere deep inside, I had started to feel the Wraith myself. Feared, neglected, and oh, so terribly alone. I still remember that night when I decided to throw all caution to the wind. I had acted like a brat that day, crying, whining when Father refused to play with me, making him smack me in the mouth. I lay on my side in my bed, wiping tears off my itchy eyes, sullenly promising myself that I'd never speak to him again. And there she was, her sari shimmering under the moonlight. She was lying on the ground right next to the bed, as if looking up at me with her empty eye sockets. I gasped and moved back in fear, squeezing my eyes shut and counting to 1,000. She'll go away if I ignore her, I reasoned. But as time passed, I began thinking to myself, would it really be all that bad if she killed me? Who would miss me? It's not like anyone has ever cared for me. Would anyone even know I was gone? With fresh tears burning my eyes, I decided to embrace death. I got up on my elbow and peered down at her. She was still there, watching, waiting. Fear stole over me like a swarm of insects, but I pushed it back down and reached down towards her. My fingers gently caressed the rough, blackened skin of her face. I half expected her to bite my fingers off, but she never moved, not even an inch. I gathered up enough courage to speak. Why do you do this? A chill ran down my spine at the sound of my own voice, but I continued. Are you trapped here? Father tells me good people go to heaven when they die. Why haven't you gone yet? Maybe she was not a good person, but I didn't dare voice that thought. So I began rambling, telling her about my life, about how lonely and sad I felt all the time, how much I missed having my mother. And she was the best listener that I had ever had. She wasn't rude and dismissive like Father, or impatient like our maid, or jumpy and afraid like other kids. She laid there in silence, and I couldn't help but feel like she was actually listening to me. Patiently, slowly digesting each word that gushed out of my mouth. I didn't even realize when I had gotten tired of my rambling and fallen asleep. The next day it truly dawned on me what I had done, how foolish I had been. I walked around in a daze, barely aware of my actions. thinking that I had doomed myself with my reckless behavior. The death was just waiting around the corner for me, ready to snatch me up and drag me off to the shadows. When the maid asked me what was wrong, I refused to tell her. I didn't want her to know about my stupidity. And what could she do to help me anyway? What could anyone do to stop the Wraith? Nothing. But my fears were grossly misplaced. The Wraith never came to kill me. I even spotted her in the house that day. But she never approached me. Emboldened, I once again set out to break all the rules devised by the village to fend off the murderous Wraith. I found her in the study, looking outside the window down at our unkempt lawn. Grabbing a book off a shelf, I nestled into a chair beside her and began telling her about my day, about how afraid I had been and how glad I was that she wasn't going to kill me. That was the true beginning of my strange friendship with the Wraith. She became a confidant, a keeper of my deepest fears and my darkest secrets. And the more I opened up to her, the more she started visiting our house, to the point that I was whispering to her every night in bed. From a terrifying spectre that haunted our mansion, she turned into a comforting presence, one that actually helped me fall asleep. In hindsight, it seems extreme messed up that I would get this close to something that dangerous, but for my younger self, she was no longer something that murdered people, but more of a wiry teddy bear. If anyone else had found out about what I was doing, I would have surely caught a beating from Father. However, no one ever did, and I was left alone to bond with a walking corpse. It would be wrong to think that our fledgling friendship changed her on a fundamental level. She still killed people just as violently as ever. But as time passed, a pattern had started to emerge. She only ever killed adults, no children. Never. It wasn't because of me, as she hadn't killed a child before either. See, there was something deeper there, a rule that she strictly followed, about who to kill and why, but it didn't become clear to me until much later on. Father eventually remarried. She was from another village and had no idea about the Wraith. She bolted out of the house in terror the first time she saw her, refusing to come back in unless Father accompanied her. Surprisingly enough, she quickly settled in, adapting to the Wraith's presence like everyone else in the village. We had a cordial relationship, nothing too deep. At least she wasn't like those evil stepmothers I had read about in fairy tales. She was just distant. But that didn't stop me from getting excited when she told me I was going to have a sibling soon. I giggled and told her I couldn't wait to meet my little sister.
A brother.
Father remarked, almost angrily.
You're gonna have a brother.
I was fine with a brother too. Anything that could make the house feel a little less empty, a little less cold. Maybe the cries of a baby would finally shatter the uncomfortable silence that seemed to be permanently enveloping the house. But that never came to be. All dreams of happiness and warmth ended that one cold night. A storm raged outside. Rain rode the strong gusts of the wind and lashed the windows at a sharp angle. I was in my room, with the Wraith standing silently next to me, as my stepmother's anguish-filled screams overwhelmed the loud pattering of the rain. It was terrifying. I had no idea giving birth was such a painful experience, and dreaded the thought of going through it myself. Not if I can help it, I thought. If it was this painful, I would rather not have a baby at all. Thank you very much. Gradually, the storm petered out, as did my stepmother's cries. I tiptoed over to the door and listened in as 2 sets of footsteps came from across the hall and went down the stairs. Father was seeing the doctor off. Getting excited, I slipped out of my room and skipped over to my father's. It was locked from the outside. I put my ear against the door. Nothing. Complete silence. Scratching my head, I went downstairs and found Father in the living room, pouring himself a drink. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him. His white clothes were soaked in blood. His knuckles were bruised and swollen. I thought he was hurt, but he wasn't. I almost wished that were the case. "Baba, what happened?" I asked, my voice the most pathetic whisper. "Are you okay?" His head shot up. He frowned.
Oh, it's you.
I twiddled my thumbs. Is the baby here yet?" He squeezed his eyes shut, an act of annoyance.
No. The baby is dead, okay? Just like all the 6 that came before you. Fuck!
He threw his glass against the wall. I jumped back.
It's a fucking curse.
He said, gnashing his teeth.
One after the other. Little whores like you! All of them!
I felt tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to move, but couldn't. I was frozen to the spot.
All I want is a boy!
He continued.
Just someone to continue my line. Is that too much to ask? All I get are whiny little cunts. One after the other. One after the other!
I started crying. I couldn't help myself.
Shut the fuck up!
He shouted, and it only made me cry harder.
Shut the fuck up, or I'll kill you, like I killed your mother, or that whore upstairs!
Sobs racked my chest, and I felt my knees wobble. Fear and grief crashed into my body, and I was no longer in control of it. Before I could even begin to process what I had just heard, Father charged at me, slapping me across the face. My head whipped to the side. He slapped me again. I fell down, and he jumped on top of me, wrapping his strong arms around my throat and squeezing with every muscle in his arms. I coughed as air instantly left my body. My eyes popped out of their skull as I tried to fight him off. I kicked, clawed, and scratched, but he was too big, too strong. Just when darkness was going to fall down like a curtain on my eyes, I heard it. A loud rumbling that seemed to roll across the sky. But it wasn't outside. It was coming from the house itself. Walls began to tremble, and pictures crashed down to the floor. It distracted Father, and he loosened his grip.
What the?
I coughed and desperately tried to squeeze in some air into my starving lungs. And that's when I saw it. The true source of the rumbling in the house. The Wraith was there on top of the staircase, and surrounding her were hundreds, no, thousands of naked, rotting infants tumbling over one another and crawling past the Wraith and down the stairs like a swarm of ants. The sounds of their otherworldly cries erupted into the house, and I had to clap my hands on my ears to protect myself. There were so many of them. Their little bodies carpeted the floor as they floated into the living room. I was afraid of what was going to happen next, of what they were going to do to me. But they ignored my shivering body and headed straight for my father. One by one, they jumped on him, sinking their yellow teeth into his flesh and tearing chunks out of it. He screamed as blood spurted out of his wounds and stained the carpet he had spent so much money on. And then proceeded to break his bones, wrapping their little hands around his limbs and twisting and turning them until his screams died in his throat and he was nothing but a misshapen pile of flesh and exposed bones on the living room floor. That unbelievable horror that unfolded in front of me had sent me into a state of shock. I sat there, staring at the corpse of my father, not understanding what had happened, not knowing what to do. After what had seemed like an eternity, I was gently pulled back into a reality by a caress. A hand, rough and gnarled, brushing against my head. I looked up. It was the Wraith, standing next to me, running her fingers through my hair. Her burnt skin was falling off her body and drifting into the air like flakes of ash. Her face was recognizable now, despite the broken nose and the gouged out eyes. My breath caught in my throat. I knew who the Wraith was. After all, I had spent so much time looking at her pictures propped up on my bedside table. The Wraith was my mother, and before her body dissolved into a mist of fine white feathers, she smiled at me, letting her love for me pour out of her heart one last time. It took me a while, but I figured it out, that for all these years, she had been protecting me, and every other newborn girl in the village.
Hope you enjoyed this episode and will join us for more.